What's the dumbest thing you've seen a coworker do on the job? Story 1. In high school, working at a Chinese restaurant was there basically to take orders and bus tables. Another dude I vaguely knew from high school got hired there. Nice, popular dude, but not much common sense. Within his first 2 weeks, he went to make himself some food. We were allowed to do that to a certain extent, and he dropped some wontons into the deep fryer. When he decided they were done, and as we were having a conversation, he just reached his hand into the oil to retrieve it. I don't think I even reacted for a moment or two, and then rushed forward. He somehow also didn't react for a moment or two before pulling his hand out and yelling out a cartoon style. He went to the hospital and quit the job. Story 2. Admit to not having spoken to any of the business stakeholders, but instead made up their own story. This was at the end of what was supposed to have been a 4-week information gathering phase of the project. That afternoon, when one of the managers went to escort her from the premises, they found her by the printer with a stack of confidential documents. Story 3. Worked with a lot of hazardous chemicals. Had a coworker who was notorious for being on his phone. We had to use a pump to put a hazardous chemical into a tank. Problem was you couldn't look at the destination and pump the pump at the same time. Someone had to pump and someone had to watch. So I specifically asked said coworker to not look at his phone this one time. Tank overflowed and spilt the chemical everywhere because he was staring at his phone. Took hours to clean up. Story 4. There were 2 of us installing an air conditioner. He had a bit of work outside that required him going up a ladder about 3 or 4 feet, not high. I was inside doing wiring. I heard a loud thud and scream, so I ran out to see what happened. He fell off the ladder. I've seen gruesome injuries from stupid thing like this before, so I ran outside to help him out. No injuries, he picked himself up and got back at it. I went back inside. 5 minutes later, same thing. I walked out to check on him again after a small fall. He was okay again, but I told him to chill out and watch what he's doing. I went back inside. Heard another thud from outside. He fell again. I just looked out the window the 3rd time and went about my business. Story 5. He cupped a piece of wood in his hand and tried to cut through it with a skill saw. He set the depth on the blade so it was just enough to go through the wood without hitting his hand. It hit his hand. Luckily, the depth wasn't enough to go all the way through, but it was still a hospital trip and a lot of stitches. Story 6. After checking the correct lockout-tagout procedure was followed, I assured an employee that it was safe to change dies on a horizontal press. But he was skeptical, so unbeknownst to anyone he put a piece of tooling steel about the size of a coffee can under the die base. Some of you know where this is going. He made the tooling change, forgot his safety measure, and cycled the press. We all heard a $400,000 press eat itself in a fantastic swansong of a noise that would take Stephen King 4 pages to describe. Story 7. Smoking in front of propane tanks after being told not to because one might be leaky. When I reminded her, she put her finger up to her mouth as if to shush me so the boss did not hear. She did not understand what the potential was and just thought it was a dumb rule. She was not a smart woman. She once asked if Virginia was between New York and New Jersey because an online man was telling her he'd pick her up on the way. She was 51. She also didn't drink water because Pepsi had water in it and it made her more thirsty. Story 8. We just had a high-voltage kVA transformer installed in my warehouse. I asked the electricians to install it high so it wouldn't be hit by a high-low. About 3 hours later, one of my managers decided to hop on a sit-down high-low and move some freight. He was not trained nor given permission to drive this machine. Well, as luck would have it, he flies past my office with the forks extended high. Yep, he punctured the transformer and boy, what a spark show. He actually bent one of the forged blades, which I have never seen before. He knocked out the power for our building and the surrounding neighborhood. He survived the incident luckily, but I fired him on the spot. Good times. Story 9. Late 90s, I was a custodian in an NYC public school to pay for college. One of my coworkers accidentally spilled about 15 gallons of gasoline in the school parking lot. He didn't want to get in trouble for spilling that much gas, so he thought the best course of action was to burn off the gasoline. Of course, gasoline burns with huge billows of black smoke, so he panics and tries to put out the fire by driving his car over the giant puddle of burning gasoline. Fire department shows up within minutes and sees him doing donuts in the giant fire, and they spend a whole hour screaming at my coworker about how stupid he was. Edit, and in 1997 when this happened, gas was 97 cents a gallon. He could have replaced all the gas for less than $15. Story 10. I've done some work at a dementia-specific aged care place. We're talking hardcore dementia. Basically, they say all sorts of random stuff with no thought whatsoever. One of my colleagues at the time started to argue with one of them as she thought they were insulting her and she had to defend herself. Went on for a few minutes before we had to break it off. And when I say a verbal argument, it was legit one person speaking the most random things and the other someone finding it insulting and explaining/defending themselves why the other was in the wrong. Story 11. I'm a nurse, my MedAid, certified and licensed, dispensed one pain med at a dose prescribed under a different med, giving the patient 10x the recommended dose, and didn't recognize the mistake for 6 hours, to a 90 pounds older lady. Luckily, this woman's organs were shutting down and didn't metabolize the med. She had 12 doses of Narcan. And was alive, awake, and chatty through the entire ordeal. No lasting effect if essentially being overdosed. Story 12. Telling the senior operations person for the office that they would take a sick day as an extra day of vacation. To be clear, neither I nor the ops person really cared, but it was the equivalent of telling HR that you were fraudulently taking time off. Really boneheaded. Also, this person started at the same time as me and then made a huge stink when I got promoted and they didn't. Basically subtly accused our bosses of sexism. The catch? You automatically received a promotion upon completing a series of certification exams, which I had. She had not. It was the most unremarkable promotion in history and she decided it was a hill to die on. She quit a few months later. Story 13. I once watched a fellow auto technician attempt to clean up the threads on an axle nut he marred up with a giant tap on a pneumatic impact gun while holding the nut in his hand. Needless to say, it slipped and tore the ever-loving crap out of his hand, requiring a hospital trip and several stitches. He's the only tech I've ever seen that was so careless and stupid that he damaged axle nut and driveshaft threads often enough that he actually went out and bought a tap and die set of whatever monstrous size those threads were. It was something like an M28X 1.5. Naz, if you're reading this, you're an idiot. Story 14. So we have these hydraulic guillotine cutters that are used to cut thick stacks of paper. They have 2 buttons. You position the stack, hold one button, then activate with the other button. 2 buttons, you literally can't operate it without 2 hands on the buttons. So some guy figures this is slowing him down too much, so he gets a push broom and uses the handle to depress the first button so he can cycle it by just hitting the second button and use the free hand to hold the stack. So, you know what happened. Even worse, he freaked out and started running around spraying blood everywhere. Story 15. Worked at a fast food restaurant, and one of the managers locked herself out of the office. One of the employees had the bright idea of trying to get over the partition and through the ceiling. He crashed through the office ceiling in a flame of glory, dragging cables and bent metal supports with him. Redditors with younger coworkers, what was your "I'm officially old" moment? Story 1. I work at a brewery part-time as a beer tender, aka bartender, for extra income and free beer. I'm 45, and most of them are in their early 20s. I like all of them, but boy, did I realize quickly that I was out of touch with today's slang in the US. We were trying a new beer, and my coworker was like, "This really slaps," and that was followed by "No cap" by another. I stood there so confused about what these guys just said. They have all taught me much more since. Story 2. I work with a couple of lads and they are huge gamers. Every conversation is about gaming in some way, shape, or form. Occasionally they'll ask me if I've played specific games, and depending on my response if the conversation continues to flow. A few days ago, they were talking about Final Fantasy VII-R and as usual asked me if I'd played the game. I said I had a couple of times and that I loved the original and consider it my all-time favorite game. They asked me when was the original released, and when I told them it was around 1997, both of the lads responded along the lines of, "I wasn't even born then." I wouldn't necessarily class myself as old, but that moment certainly made me feel it. Story 3. This effing toddler software developer had the freaking nerve to tell me that Windows 95 was released before he was born. I was like, no dude, it was just a few years ago. I asked him how old he was. He tells me he's 26, just finished his master's. He must be thinking of DOS 6 or around there. Yup. He was born after Windows 95 was released. Story 4. We have half walls between our desks and I was talking to my coworker who sat at the desk beside me over the half wall between us. The wall comes right up to the bottom of my face, so I said I feel like Wilson from Home Improvement. And he said, "What's that?" Also the time another coworker got his ear pierced over the weekend and was saying, "Yeah, I wanted to try out an earring now instead of waiting until I'm like 30 and old." Story 5. For me, it's listening to a much younger group of girls complain about the guys they are hung up on. They are beautiful and young and have aspiring careers, and they'll tell me a story of what a guy did on a date and they're like, "I don't know what to do." And I'm just sitting there like, are you kidding me? Tell him to go screw himself and find someone else who values and respects you. I'm in my 40s now, I don't take crap anymore, and my current boyfriend treats me like a queen. I'm always telling them to accept nothing less than absolute princess treatment from a guy. They never listen though. Story 6. I'm 31 and have a few coworkers younger than me. The 26-year-old was complaining about how old he felt. I had to teach the 22-year-old how to turn her computer on. The 19-year-old didn't understand that the check she's cutting are someone else's paycheck and had to have it explained to her that if the company she's paying doesn't get this check, they can't pay their employees. The 22-year-old also uses a lot of slang I don't understand and constantly talks about stuff she saw on TikTok. Story 7. I worked in a restaurant and we had a new hire. She was 18 and we were talking about TV shows. Not sure why, but I mentioned TV Guide. She had zero clue what I was talking about. I told her we used to have to search a book to know what time a show was playing and to make sure we watched it, otherwise you would have to wait again to hopefully watch it again. She looked at me like I was crazy. The thought of not being able to have instant access or at least be able to record it was alien to her. We had a laugh about it all, but that is when I realized I was way too old. Story 8. A bunch of wild types live in my neighborhood, an apartment complex. Whether they're skater kids trying to hide the blunt in their hand as they're riding down the hill, or the drug dealer who was hardly inconspicuous with his business, the college girls always doing their TikTok/IG selfie videos, or the group of 4 to 5 college boys that all live in a 2-bedroom unit. Whenever I walk my dog, he's a good boy, whether it's 5 a.m. or middle of the day or 10 p.m., every one of these groups of people step aside as I'm walking by, and they all call me sir, but like, in a respectful way, not like a, "I'm scared of this guy," or a joking way, but like a, I dunno, they make me feel like I'm an elder or something. But yeah, when the thugged out drug dealer called me sir the first time, I think that was the moment I realized I'm an old man. I'm 38. Story 9. I have some white patches in my beard. It's fine, it looks great, it's symmetrical, no big deal. But I play music at frat/sorority parties all over the place, and there's a really noticeable difference in the way I'm treated when I dye my beard versus leaving it as is. Like, straight up one of us treatment versus my dad's age treatment. I mean, I knew I was old, but I don't think I realized how differently I was being treated because of a few white hairs until I dyed it for one gig, and the difference in the reception was shocking. 36, BTW. I'm not self-conscious at all, for what it's worth, not about my age or my beard or any of it. I'm still a rock star when I play these shows. But I have more fun when I get the peer treatment, so I usually do that. They also seem more impressed by what I do when they don't realize I've been doing it for 20 years. So yeah, I'm old, and sometimes I'm faking it. I won't be able to fake it forever, so I'm just having some fun. Story 10. My buddy and I were talking about the movie I Know What You Did Last Summer, and one of the servers was like, "Why are you guys talking about a Shawn Mendes song?" That was a weird one. That and when servers were guessing the ages of the kitchen staff and one of them put me at 40 and I'm only 31. Either I've aged very poorly or I dunno. Story 11. 5 or 6 years back, my team and I went out for lunch around the holidays. Somehow, "Where were you on September 11th?" came up, and we're all going around the table sharing stories. I was in my first week of university. I thought a third world war was about to break out, and I was in exactly the right age to have to go fight it. I watched the second plane hit live on television, and by the afternoon I was making plans to join the Navy. I tell this story, and a lot of the senior people around the table's heads are nodding, then the new hire chimes in. I was in the second grade. Today, most of those senior people have moved on to other things, and my team has grown to include a number of young people. Sometimes I tell them the tales of 20 years ago when I learned how to use Adobe Photoshop 7.0 that came on a thing called a CD. My graphic designers nod. They've heard those legends before, but they were pre-JK at the time. Then they show me how to do something in Photoshop the non-dinosaur way, and I nod too. I've heard the legends of these newfangled ways that make my hard jobs easy before. Story 12. Had a coworker who was 17 at the time mention a band, I forget who, but I think it the Foo Fighters, and she said her mom listened to them all the time. I asked how old her mom was, and she was only 2 or 3 years older than me. When I told her that I was so close to her mom in age, she was shocked and told me that, "Well, you're not like parent old, you're cool old." I have never felt so ancient. She also told me excitedly one day about an old show she discovered. It was the OC. Story 13. Less coworkers, more charges, but I'd nannied over 20 years. One of the kids was learning about NASA and asked me if I remembered the shuttle disaster. I told her I was in preschool and we were going to watch the space shuttle go up because there was a teacher on it. We were watching when it exploded. Teachers hit the off button on that TV so fast and took us outside. She asked how I was in preschool if it only happened 10 years ago. She meant Columbia. I thought of Challenger. My most vivid memory of watching the Challenger explode was a boy's voice behind me asking, "Are they okay?" We were 4-year-olds, so. Story 14. Young girl at work said, "Oh, I can do that on my iPad. I have that power." Naturally, I replied, "I have the power, like He-Man," and she brightened up and said, "Over 9,000. I said, "Oh, no, that's Dragon Ball Z." I was quoting He-Man. She looked at me like I sprouted a second head. Apparently she didn't know that the "it's over 9,000" is from Dragon Ball Z. I'm not even an anime fan, and even I knew that, and thought it was just an internet meme, and B, had never even heard of He-Man or She-Ra. I grew up on those shows and she never even heard of them. Story 15. I'm 36. Have a 19 years old coworker who I recognize as just a baby but still didn't think of us as being different generations. We talk about different things. She just had a pregnancy issue and was going through it with her mom. Realized her mom is probably close to my age, and I was right, she's 40, my daughter is only 8. Last week she tagged me in a meme that was something like, "If you think a work wife is great, get you a work mom."